Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It is Ian here in Beijing. It's May 2022 and we are in a period of tighter COVID controls because there is a small outbreak at this moment. Things do seem as though they're under control, and the last few days we've been able to get out and about and get to the local parks. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about today. And I move away from talking about the outbreak. I wanted to spend a little bit of time just to talk about parks in China and compare them to my experience of parks in the UK. And there is a reason why I like being in a park so much. And it's because when I was young, I grew up living next to a park. I grew up living in Drumchapel, which is a place in Glasgow in Scotland. I grew up on a street called Howgate Avenue. The street faced directly onto the park. The park was called Drumchapel Park, funny enough. And that was my local park. There was my street, the park, and then there was a shopping centre. And all of them were a real big part of a busy community. In the street where we lived, there was loads of kids. There was ourselves, and I had 3 sisters and a couple of brothers. There was Duncan Dawson, Kenny Boyd, John McPherson, who we called Percy. There was Davy Jones, who was always running around fast. Susan Thompson, Valerie Irvin, Pat Rogers and his sisters, Elizabeth, Jennifer. There was loads of kids in that area. There were the older kids like John Biscuits McDonald. And I still don't know to this day why we called him Biscuits, but I'm sure I'll find out. It was a great place to grow up. The kids were always in the park, football games, etc. People would come from the other areas of Drumchapel and join in, and it was a great experience. So when I was a kid, I couldn't wait to get out to play. It was magical. The park was well looked after. It had a putting green with a wee green hut where you would hire out your putter and the golf ball. There was tennis courts, bowling green. There was a decent swing park. There were flower beds. Everything was well kept. It was a really great early start in life to have that sort of luxury in a housing scheme in Glasgow. And when I close my eyes or when I smell cut grass, I can remember these summers in the park. Now the park keepers would come around at 10 p.m. in their wee red van on a warm summer night, and they would kick everyone out, close up the gates of the park. For the evening, we had a great relationship with the parkies or the park keepers. They would chase us out of the park. But then, in the mid-80s, things started to change, and the park keepers were no longer there, and the gates to the park, they were left open 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This meant that the park started to decline, and the drunks from the local bars and the Drumchapel shopping centre, they would fall out the bars at night, wander in the park, and then often just sleep there, sleeping off their alcohol indulgence. The bars in the Drumchapel, bars like the Gurning Gates, the Heckler Arms, the Butty, they were rough area or rough places back then. So in the morning you could see these guys waking up in the park. They would look like zombies. They'd be dressed like almost like Boris Johnson on a good day, and you would see them in the sunlight waking up and trying to go home. The park was also next to the shopping mall, and the shops would get broken into, and they would run through the park with the stuff that they robbed and being chased by the police. And then sometimes they would dump things into our garden or our backyard area. And at night, when I was a kid lying in bed, I could hear them running through the gardens being chased and the police alarms. And then the next morning we would get up and we would see bags, handbags, shoes and shoe boxes and stuff in our garden. And my father, he was a real honest man. He would call the police and he would hand the stuff back, obviously. It was a little bit wild growing up at that time in Drumchapel. And Drumchapel had and has loads and loads and loads of great people there, so I don't want to disrespect Drumchapel. But the park went from being a place of fun and safety to being a place that became quite scary for a kid. Now, I contrast that with the parks that I see here in China, and the parks here, they remind me very much of what the parks in the UK were like from my early childhood before the things started to change.
Ready? Step in. 在一些小的输入挑战。
The parks here are places where people come to enjoy the space and spend time with their families. There are activities in the park. You can see how well the parks are maintained, how much people use them. I don't see any violence, drunkenness, graffiti, any bad behaviour. What I do see is investment in time and money. This is always the biggest difference that I see here in China. That is, the investment in the local amenities here in China are so far superior to what I see in the West. And it becomes really obvious when you travel around places in China that it just doesn't compete. Now, I know I am broad brushing things here, and there are great parks in the UK. They are reasonably well looked after, but it's just not in the same league as what I experience here in China. So I just can't get my head around why people don't see this comparison and why people in the UK accept the crap that they get served up. People really should demand more. And look at other countries around the world and take in some people like mine, like my experiences that are shared on the internet, and then ask questions about why do we not have that quality here in the UK. You should ask your government to spend money on the right things that better the life of the whole community rather than the pockets of the few. And I just don't get why people do not rise up a little bit more and demand to be heard and demand for the money to be spent more on the local communities. Anyway, that's my reflections of parks here in China compared to the UK. Now, let me share some of the local parks that I've experienced here in China with you so you can understand my point. In Beijing, having a little bit of a raw rant. Peace out.